Thank you for joining us. My name is Scott Hicks. I'm the director of the Teaching and Learning Center at UNC Pembroke. I'm joined today by Dr. Miko Nino for Instructional Delivery Methods for Fall 2020 classes. Dr. Nino, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hicks. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks again. We welcome you to this webinar. Please remember that it's being recorded so that individuals who can't join us today can watch it at a later date. We're going to talk about what it is that we can look forward to for fall 2020 and reiterate through this presentation how online learning and the Teaching and Learning Center are here and ready to help you navigate any challenge that you might encounter. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll go ahead and get started. So to set the context as we begin today, this webinar is focused on making good on the university's decision to offer classes as much as possible in a face-to-face manner. According to the university system and the university, instruction that is currently scheduled to take place in a face-to-face manner should take place in that manner as much as is feasible given space requirements for social distancing. In cases where face-to-face instruction is not feasible because of spatial constraints, alternative methods of delivery may be considered. Today's webinar then is to equip you with some of the ideas and then to help you understand and sort of conceive of your work in ways that we can help you out through online learning and the TLC. So our goals today, we have three goals. The first is to explain standard instructional delivery definitions. We want to make sure that we're all operating from the same page and that when we work with you and you work with us, we're able to share a common language as we move forward. We want to be able to provide examples and best practices for each definition. We want to be able to think through the pros and cons of these approaches as well, so that you can identify potential challenges and solutions in instruction.
Before we move forward, we would like also to clarify the roles that we have for the Office of Online Learning and the Teaching and Learning Center. Please be mindful that we are not the ones making the decisions about how you have to teach your content online or what courses should be delivered in which format. The goal for this presentation is to explain and expand on the definitions that have been chosen by the UNCP administration, and those definitions were created based on the standard definitions for the field. That's how instructional design and online learning, they have defined those types of courses. And our role is basically to provide the training, the resources, and overall assistance as you are designing your courses and teaching them. So once you decide with your department chair or your dean about how you're going to teach the course, what modality, then we can provide assistance to make it happen. So the idea of the presentation is for you to have a clear understanding of each type of course. So when given the assignment, you know how to proceed. And again, we are here to help you navigate the challenges and help you experience success as well. So before we move forward, also, we want to make sure there's an understanding about how this is going to work based on the different types of online courses and face-to-face courses. So everything that you're doing in the classroom needs to happen online if you are given the choice of going online. This means that as much as possible, any activity that you're doing in the classroom, you have to find an alternative online. And that's where we can help you. We can make sure we find the means to translate that activity into an online or hybrid environment. What we want to avoid, and quality assurance and accreditation wants to avoid, is just telling the students, read chapter 4, take this quiz, or read this article, take this test. We want to make sure you actually have instruction. Even if it's online, real instruction needs to happen. And that's beyond the homeworks and assignments that you are going to assign them anyways. So we just wanted for you to know those three things before we continue with the presentation.
So in this presentation, we're going to talk about 4 different modalities of courses. First, face-to-face or F2F, hybrid, alternative hybrid, and fully online. I'm going to speak now about face-to-face modalities. Of course, you may be already quite familiar with face-to-face instruction. It's a course in which all instruction takes place in the classroom. Even though online activities and assignments can take place online, outside the classroom, they do not replace the instructional time in the classroom. For a physically distanced or socially distanced classroom, a viable mode of face-to-face instruction is lecture. This entails the faculty member standing apart from students and students sitting apart, and the faculty member more or less speaking directly to the students who may ask questions throughout. Less viable modes of instruction in a physically distanced face-to-face classroom, however, are active learning, collaborative learning, and hands-on learning. These are kinds of instruction where the faculty member may move around the class, where students may work together and share ideas. These are going to become more difficult in a face-to-face setting. And I want to talk next about some of the ways that we can address those. So we have a list of pros and cons here. An upside to a face-to-face instruction in the physically distanced classroom is that you might continue what you're doing. You may be comfortable in the face-to-face setting. You may have presentations and slideshows that you're ready to continue to give. You're going to be able to continue to do this kind of work in that face-to-face setting. The con, of course, is that you might continue doing what you're doing. We hope that you'll see an opportunity here, even despite all of the pandemic and its challenges, to rethink or to innovate or to try out new things, especially when other faculty members, your colleagues, also are trying to figure things out. And you can maybe try something new. You can work together and do something differently. Another pro and con, of course, is that you might not be able to continue doing what you're doing. As the semester unfolds, you might become sick, or you may have to care for someone who's sick, or you may have a child or other individual that you give care to and you're not able to come to campus. It might be also that some of the members of your class or multiple members of your class are in quarantine because they have contracted the virus. So the pro of this is you might not be able to continue doing what you're doing, so you're doing new things online. But the con, of course, is that sickness or illness may keep us and our students from joining each other in the classroom. Another benefit is that students might be more comfortable in a traditional classroom. Some of our students might not have taken online classes before, or they might not have done well in the online classes they took. So they may enjoy coming to the classroom. I know from the spring semester that my students missed seeing one another. And when we met on WebEx, they appreciated that chance to talk with one another and check in. So they might be more comfortable in that traditional classroom. A con, of course, is that students might be less comfortable in a classroom where they worry that their peers or their classmates or us as faculty might be a vector for COVID-19. They might have seen some of their friends at a party the other night and then wonder whether they're taking the right precautions or whether they're being exposed. So students might be less comfortable in a traditional setting than in semesters past. Another upside to face-to-face instruction is that you can record your lectures for posting online and for future classes. If you're in the face-to-face classroom and you're giving your presentation through PowerPoint and you're projecting it from your computer to the screen, you can use your laptop machine to record you as you speak, video and/or audio. And in this way, you're recording lectures for posting online for your students now, but also for future classes. A couple more cons, however, of face-to-face instruction is that your course is less resilient if the spread of COVID-19 worsens. As we remember from the spring, when we transitioned in an emergency way online, we had to build new things. So as you plan a face-to-face class for the coming semester, you may wish to think about how it is you would transition to a fully online or remote style of teaching if COVID-19 spreads. Another con of the face-to-face instruction is that you have responsibility for assuring the health of your students. Your students might look to you to manage student behavior that is not in keeping with our goals for social distancing. Your students may look to you to enforce the mask wearing rule on campus, for example, or look to you to work out problems that they may be having given different ways of following some of the public health guidelines. So again, there are pros and cons to face-to-face, and so long as you are aware of these pros and cons, we think you can design the class that you need for the coming semester. Our next slide features some different strategies that you might use. And I'll say here that this could be used for both a face-to-face classroom or a hybrid classroom, and really in most any modality. First of all, you might use live polling. As you lecture, students in the classroom and outside the classroom can respond to questions. You may have a front channel or back channel. If you and your class are meeting on WebEx meetings, for example, you can use the chat features, the same as we faculty do in faculty forums, to ask questions, to answer questions, to say that you need help or need something else explained. You could have students monitoring these chats and shepherding the questions into categories that then would help all students, both in the classroom and outside the classroom, better understand the material. Collaborative note-taking is a wonderful way to create an archive of a class, both face-to-face or online. During your lecture or during instructional material, students can be assigned the role of note-taker for the class, and using a Google Doc that is available to all students in the class, can take notes, ask questions, answer questions on that resource that becomes a running document for students to access throughout the semester. If you were a part of the Teaching and Learning Center's book group last year that discussed Lisa Nunn's book, 33 Simple Strategies, you could help students learn about good study guides. And this Google Doc could be a way that students learn to practice good study guides that they then share with one another. You also can have students working in groups. You might have students in your classroom, you might have students on WebEx, you might have students joining asynchronously later. Using Google Sheets and putting questions in assigning groups within the Google Sheet, you can see students working together in real time or asynchronously to answer some of the questions and engage with your lecture material. If you are meeting face-to-face, you can use written work to help spread ideas in the classroom without speaking. Our School of Education classrooms on the second floor have whiteboards available and large whiteboards at the front of the room and the sides of the room. Students can spread out and write answers to your questions on these whiteboards that then allow the students to engage in real time with your material without, in a way, infringing upon anyone else's space. There are many ways to do think, pair, share. With low tech, for example, students can text one another with a question that you might pose to the class. So rather than sitting together and speaking together, you could have students in the class texting one another, or from inside the classroom to outside the classroom, texting one another and responding to your think, pair, share prompts. A wonderful way to get student groups to report out is to jigsaw your groups, to begin with groups of 4, say, that then jigsaw into different groups with members from the original groups present in the second groups. In this way, students can work through WebEx meetings or Teams, or through Google Docs, Google Sheets, through texting or phone, and share ideas with students who are inside the classroom as well as outside the classroom. And you can also use a fishbowl technique, where perhaps students who are listening online listen to the student conversation inside the classroom. The students inside the classroom in this case are the fish, and the students who are outside the classroom are sitting outside the fishbowl. And then they summarize, analyze, interpret, ask questions about, assess the rightness or wrongness of that inside the classroom discussion. Last, physical movement, again going back to the ideas of whiteboards and dry erase markers. You can use Post-it notes and flip chart paper for students to write out their ideas and post them around the room. Again, these are all interventions that we hope you might consider in face-to-face instruction as well as hybrid or online instruction as ways that help you make your learning and your teaching active and engaged for your students. On the next slide, we're talking about hybrid instruction. Hybrid instruction is defined as a course in which a percentage of instruction takes place in the classroom, while the remaining takes place online, synchronously or asynchronously. We aim for 50-50 here, or a rich balance of online as well as face-to-face instruction. This online time is beyond activities and assignments, and it replaces classroom instructional time. In this way, we want you to be able to think about your online time, about its instructional value, as well as the instructional value of your face-to-face time. So some examples of hybrid classes. In the first example, students meet once a week in the classroom and they work online the rest of the week. Actual online instruction takes place in the form of recorded lectures or live online sessions beyond assignments and activities. As you know, with WebEx, you can record a lecture, give it in real time, record it, and then offer it to your students for their consideration when they are able to access it. In another example, students and instructors meet in the first half of the semester in the classroom, while the remaining portion of the semester is taught online. This is similar to our spring 2020 experience, but going forward, we hope that we're able to better plan for any kind of contingency that we might encounter. Some pros and cons for the hybrid modality for teaching. An upside is that your course is resilient despite what happens to you or your students. You might have your full hybrid course already laid out on Canvas, so if someone becomes sick, students are able to continue to follow along on Canvas because materials are there and available to them. You've also made it possible perhaps to set up groups or to connect students one to another so that they're able to continue working together no matter what happens in the semester. Another benefit is that you can share resources with other faculty teaching in a hybrid style. If you and other faculty teach sections of the same introductory course, for example, you might decide that you will share with your students recordings of other faculty members' lectures. In this way, perhaps a faculty member with an expertise in one area of your course can share their knowledge, while you pay the favor back by providing your knowledge, your expertise, to that professor and her or his students in their course. In this way, you can share videos with one another of instructional content that allow your students to learn from all of the experts in your department. Another benefit of hybrid teaching is that you build face-to-face community that enhances online community. As I think back to my own experience in the spring, my students had created highly effective, hard-working groups. They liked working with one another. They knew each other's quirks. They knew when they had deadlines and who would do what and how they worked together. It made for that transition online much easier because they continued their work together. So in a hybrid class, a significant upside is that building face-to-face community can support your students in their online community as well. The final upside that we list here is that your students encounter media-rich, engaging content beyond the walls and schedule of your class. You might be able to lecture and do some active learning face-to-face, but then provide them with dynamic lectures or media materials that engage them in the content beyond what you might have expected. In this way, you're able to give them access to a rich set of materials. Some of the cons of the hybrid approach include these. You might feel unprepared to offer part of your course online. If you're able to begin face-to-face, I encourage you to reach out to your students and work with them to figure out what will work. Your students are experts in how they learn, and they're experts in the experience that they had in fall and spring 2020. So if you feel unprepared to offer part of your course online, please ask your students. They'll be able to help you. Another con is that some students cannot, or will not take part in face-to-face meetings. This may be a con in terms of they're not engaging in the face-to-face opportunities, but you are at least offering them that access. If they become sick, however, the hybrid model allows them to continue their instruction online when they are well. And as with face-to-face, you still have some responsibility for assuring the health of your students. When you're in the classroom, you will probably find yourself monitoring or managing student behaviors that run counter to the social distancing guidelines that the university has put forward. If you're teaching in a classroom, you will still have some responsibility for managing your classroom in a way that prevents the spread of infection.
Let's talk now about the third type of course, which is the alternative hybrid. And many of you have heard before the term high flex. An alternative hybrid is something that we are implemented at UNCP based on the high flex. By definition, a high flex course is a course in which you don't have all the students at once in the classroom. You have some of them in the classroom and you have some others online. And you offer the freedom of choice to your students to decide when to join and how to join. As you can understand, high flex is beneficial for the students, lots of flexibility, but from the billing, enrollment, and even attendance standpoint can be very difficult to have such a flexible model. So basically, the alternative hybrid removes that flexibility for the student and give it to the faculty members. So you will decide who will be in the classroom, who will be online, and when, instead of the student deciding that. And that's going to help you to avoid to have a lot of people in the classroom violating social distancing, or nobody attending classes face to face and everybody just wanting to join online. That's the purpose of the alternative hybrid. So the way it works is you have a large class and you're going to divide it in groups, and all of them are going to have the same amount of face-to-face components and the same amount of online instruction, but not at the same time. So I'm going to explain to you how this is going to work through this example. So let's imagine that you teach Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you have, let's say, 20 students. You're going to bring only 10 on Tuesday, and the other 10 are going to be online. And it can be synchronous, meaning that they can join via WebEx, or you can ask them to work self-paced through activities in Canvas. Then on Thursday, those 10 who work online will have to come to the classroom, while those 10 who were face-to-face on Tuesday now are working online. That way, everybody gets the same type of online and face-to-face in the same week. So it's really important that everybody gets to experience the same at some level or at some point in the course. We cannot emphasize enough that it has to be beyond assignments and activities. So for instance, if on a regular face-to-face class on Thursday, I'm going to ask them to do a group activity with some questions and they have to do a pure interaction, that very activity needs to happen online. And I say that because sometimes there's a misconception like, oh, well, they're going to be working online today. And instead of asking them to do the same thing they will do in class, you might just ask them to just read and complete a quiz. And unless you're not doing that in the classroom, then it's not real instruction. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So there are some pros and cons for each model, each modality that you have seen. So the pros of the alternative hybrid is like it's flexible. So if students cannot be physically in the classroom, that's fine because you have an online alternative. And also because you still have a lot of student interaction. Sometimes in online courses, students don't get to enjoy that student interaction, and you still have that with the alternative hybrid. However, we are going to admit that as a con, it's a very complex design. You really have to think well how you're going to make this happen. It's not that easy, but it's not impossible. We have experience doing that. I have assisted many faculty members working some types of these modalities. Scott Hicks, a Teaching and Learning Center, they have experience also working with faculty members, and we will work with you to make it happen. But be mindful that it takes some thought process. It's very complex, so you need to plan ahead. And we encourage you not to wait till the semester is about to start. The sooner the better. And also you will need equipment, because if you're asking half the classroom to join via WebEx, you need to have a good mic, you need to have all the things to make it happen, and you should not just forget about them. Remember, they're there, and you have to find ways to use equipment to include them in the conversation. So those weeks when you are in the classroom, those sessions when you're in the classroom with half the students, these are some of the things that you can be doing. Of course, you can record the lecture and ask them to later view that. And that's positive because sometimes if you have WebEx and your connection is not really good, or your students cannot access the internet, if you did not record the lecture, it can be frustrated. So you might want as well record the lecture. We encourage you also to connect your classroom, so the cam and the microphone, so they can interact with you, they can interact with those face to face, they can see also what's happening in the class. For those who are online, you can ask them to complete a survey or to type their thoughts in the chat box, and you can read that every now and then. You can have a survey, a poll, because those things allow them to interact and to be part of the conversation. And also you can promote teamwork. Let's say that you are asking students to pair with some distance. You can do the same thing with those who are online, because WebEx has the ability to break down a big group into teams, and you can actually go and visit each room and all of that. So don't forget that that's possible. So that's when you are actually in the classroom. But let's say that you are not in the classroom and that they have the other students, they have to be online. Well, they can record the lecture. You can record the lecture and they can watch that recorded lecture. Or you can also complete a self-paced module with learning objectives, content, quizzes, games. Basically, they complete the whole activity and they get to interact with content. You can also ask them to work on a team activity, a project, and they will have to find ways to interact and work remotely. Readings. Readings, they have to be something beyond the traditional regular readings. So unless that Thursday, for instance, they were going to use the whole hour and 15 minutes to read in class, then that will not be an appropriate activity for online. As I said, whatever they were supposed to be doing in the classroom, you have to find a mechanism to do that online. So those readings that they will have to do anyways, they don't count as a replacement for the online session. One of my favorites that I have done is guided instruction, and I love them because it really fosters active thinking and critical thinking. And for those of you who are not familiar, you give some level of lecturing or instruction. It can be a short video, it can be written instructions, and then you ask them to do something with that content that you deliver. So in that way, you're really hands-on, you're fostering active learning, but at the same time, you're respecting uh, social distancing and you're doing something really good in terms of quality for the online portion of that week. And also the projects. And again, if your expectation was to use that Thursday for them to work hands-on on a project, then that's good. But if they still have to do the project on their own time, then that's not something that can be replaced in instruction. So that's some ways about going for the alternative hybrid. And please be mindful that you as faculty members, we believe that you have leeway and you should have the right to decide what mix of activities fits best for your course. Me as an instructional designer, I have always said that sadly there is not like a magical formula that tells you this is the perfect best way to teach a course. Every course is different. Every audience is different. Every content cannot be delivered universally. And that's why we always encourage you to request help or book a consultation, because the uniqueness of each course, we work with that to make sure you have a really positive and effective course. And then number 4, which is fully online. It's basically you're never in the classroom. You can actually complete the whole course and students can complete all the work online. Within fully online, you have 3 types, which is synchronous, live, basically what we're doing now. We are all at the same time, same day, connected using WebEx, for instance, for instruction. Or you can have asynchronous. Asynchronous is self-paced. Everything happens on the platform on Canvas. You post everything that they need for the week, and then they complete activities that includes the test, the quiz, the lecture, the readings, all of that. Be mindful that deadlines are very important. And one best practice that I encourage is to ask students to submit work of some type, some sort of activity every week. One of the reasons why online courses fail, it's because sometimes we design courses in which we let them work on their own for 7 weeks. I have seen that sometimes you let the students work alone for a whole semester. And then at the end, they have to submit a big test or a couple of tests, and they never get feedback. They never get interaction. They never get a peer reviews. They never get a chance to interact or have a progress check on how well they're doing. And for asynchronous to work, you really need to have those deadlines and you have to provide timely feedback. And then you have blended, which is synchronous and asynchronous. And there is no set rule about the amount. Based on your needs, based on the course, some weeks you might decide, this is more discussion oriented. I need to provide feedback. So let's meet via WebEx. But other weeks you are like, so long that you complete these activities by the deadline, that's completely fine. So all of them, they have pros and cons. With synchronous, you have the pro that is really close to face-to-face, is the closest online experience to face-to-face. So it's not really difficult to transition to that. You can provide timely feedback because you can ask a question, your students will give you an answer, and you can correct or provide further information if needed. You can foster discussions and peer interaction with no problem when you are using a synchronous modality. The cons, however, is that you need to have really good internet. There is nothing more frustrating than joining a session, a class, and you cannot hear the instructor. The instructor cannot hear you. You cannot hear your classmates. You lose them halfway there. You cannot come back because the internet is not working. It's really frustrating. So you have to be mindful of that. And it's not really flexible because you have to be there. Everybody has to be there at that very time, that very day. And if you get sick or for some reason your internet it's not working that week, you might not be able to have a positive experience. So you have to be mindful of that. With asynchronous, you have the pros that you promote self-regulation. Me, myself, when I have taught and when I have done training, I tend to promote self-regulation in learners. Learners should be able to self-regulate the learning. They should be able to manage their time and apply project management skills. And a good way of fostering that is when you take an asynchronous course, definitely. And you have flexibility. If I'm sick for a couple days, I can still have other days in the week to catch up. If for some reason my internet was not working that day or 2 days, I can go somewhere the other days or I can have it fixed. So I have flexibility within a week or 2 weeks, depending on how you structure that. The cons is that feedback is more difficult to give. You have to be on top of that. It's not impossible. It's just like it's not timely. It's not instant. It's not right away. But you can still do that via email, via Canvas, using a discussion. Also, that interaction can be challenging because they don't get to talk at the same time. So you have to do something like a teamwork or a rubric, or again, the voice threads discussions to be able to still promote a student interaction. I know that some faculty think that student interaction is optional, and I understand it's more difficult in some courses, but a good online course has that student interaction. To give you an example, to pass the Quality Matters certification, your course needs to show student interaction. Many students are hesitant about joining an online program because they miss and they think they're going to miss that networking component, that social interaction component. That is one of the main reasons why you go to college. So it's really important if we start thinking that it's optional and we start seeing the value in that to attract students and also fostering learning. And the other con is that I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of work, it's time consuming. Putting everything on an asynchronous format takes a lot of time, it's overhead. But again, you can also think that the pro is that you already have that created. So once you create that, you can be reusing that. And once you have gone through the first creation, then it's less time consuming than even face to face because you have all the content created. And then for blended, you have, the pros is like it's the best of both worlds because some weeks you have that flexibility, you work on your own. Other weeks we can discuss in the classroom. Feedback, you can provide feedback right there. You still have self-regulation because they still need to be able to regulate their learning and decide on how to manage time. And you also have the flexibility because some weeks they can be in the dorm, at home if they're, quarantining, self-isolating, all of that. You have that flexibility. But for blended, the planning is more complex. So you have to be mindful of that. And you also have the need for reliable internet and equipment. And for some students, it can be confusing and inconsistent. So you have to be mindful of telling them in a really clear calendar. These weeks, we're going to be going synchronous. These other weeks, you have the ability to work on your own. And at first, it can be confusing for students. So you have to be reminding them every week. Remember, this week it's not asynchronous, it's actually live via WebEx. And we want to use the rest of the hour of the session to answer questions because the possibilities and the scenarios are endless. There are so many choices. There are so many ways of navigating this around. Just, again, be mindful that we pick definitions standard in the field. This is not something that we made up. This is how professionals in the field define these types of courses. And I know that sometimes in your course, maybe you had a mix of things that are maybe a combination of two types or something like that. But we wanted to make sure that you understand that the definitions are standard in the field. And with that, we want to leave it open for Q&A. Thank you so much. I saw that Dr. Hicks started answering questions.
Maybe we could begin with that last question then, Miko, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, can you please read it?
Yes. So I'm still a bit confused about the idea that I must offer students the same content in class and online. Would that mean offering the same lecture content, for example, in both A and B sessions? Or does that mean that A session students get a live lecture that I pre-recorded and posted for B session students to view on the same day and vice versa? What are your thoughts there?
You have the ability as a faculty member to decide. You can do either way. Just be mindful that if, again, as I said, if you decide that the content is not going to be the same in the lecture, your online component is as similar as that lecture as possible. You cannot just say, okay, I'm gonna lecture these people here, and then those who didn't come to class are just going to read the text. That is when it's not a good. But you can decide, A and B both work.
I like the idea too of pre-recording. I
Mhm.
think that's a wonderful way to build in some resilience into your course. So no matter what happens with COVID-19, you have learning material already available to students via Canvas. It's a great point, I think, about pre-recording, as well as making sure the content is the same for both sections. Some of the other questions we had were about flipped classrooms. What methods that we discussed today of the four work best with flipped classrooms, or might they all work with a flipped classroom?
I think flipped classrooms are really good for face-to-face, obviously, because by the time they come to class, everybody has a common ground. Everybody has read the chapters, watched the recording, and even allows you to change from lecturing to more a facilitator as a role. So that's the main reason why flips work really well for face-to-face. I also believe that the problem is like flip should not replace any type of online modality. So if you're gonna flip it, it's because everyone is going to complete those online activities prior to whatever you decide to do in the classroom or online.
With
So
the
be
flip
mindful that flip as a concept technically only applies for a face-to-face and synchronous online courses because you can ask them to complete activities and something like that. By the time they join you via WebEx or in the classroom, they have completed all of that.
And I was going to say too that I think the flipped classroom also builds in some resilience. You have materials again available to students. And I think that the challenge for students in the fall is going to be doing things face to face in person that they couldn't have done online. I think one of the things we'll want to be sure of as we move forward is that what we do in the classroom is meaningful to them. that they have to be in the classroom to be able to do. There's a question here too. To what extent are some options, as in the impactful intervention slide, assuming that certain technologies are available in the classroom? Not all classrooms have WebEx, and ANS chairs have been asked to provide a list of classrooms for priority in equipping them with webcams and microphones. This is a question too that came up earlier. First, I would say that every classroom that has a machine and a browser has WebEx, because we can access WebEx via our computers and via our browsers. We don't have to have a WebEx classroom to access WebEx. As I said to another answer, that would work really well for streaming in students who are taking part remotely, similar to having a guest speaker. It would be more difficult, though, if the classroom is not set up as a WebEx classroom, to have students doing discussion and expecting students outside the room to be able to hear it. I've been reading that even in WebEx-enabled classrooms, it can be difficult. Students report for other students outside to hear. Another question was asked about recording lectures. I stated that I'm planning to open my laptop, share it with the screen so that the students in the classroom can see it. Anyone who's outside the classroom can also see it. And then doing some mini lectures during our time together face to face. So in this way, the students who are not in the classroom are able to see and hear the lectures. And then if we go back to some of those impactful interventions, there are some low-tech ways that students could collaborate, such as through text or their phones. So I think that I'm assuming there that I'm going to use my laptop because the classroom might not have a webcam or microphone. But so long as that computer in the classroom is hooked to the internet and you have a browser, you are able to get to WebEx and then be able to project that image and hear what students are saying from remotely, the same as you might stream in a guest speaker. So Miko, as you think about live lecturing in the classrooms, what are some of the opportunities and pitfalls you see?
Yeah, well, for one, the quality of the sound, it's really important that if you don't have a good mic, you might be restricted because you have to stay very close to the computer. If you're unable to do that, I don't encourage to do that. Me, as a speaker, I move around everywhere. So there's no way I can be just 1 hour by the podium unless I have a lapel mic. If you ask me, and again, I respect and we will always respect your choices as a faculty member. If you ask me, what in my mind, given the limitations, the technology, the requests that I have seen, I encourage you to record a lecture and post that for those online. And then you can even embed some assessments, some discussion questions to the lecture. And then you treat the face-to-face as you want to, just face-to-face, because you don't have to worry about your students not being able to access at that very time your lecture. You don't have the issues of the MICE compatibility. And you as a faculty member, sometimes it's really tough to include those people who are online. I have tried to do that, and I have to put notes on my hand or in the walls just to remind myself that I have a group via WebEx that needs most of my attention. So that's the main one. If you're not gonna be able to include everyone in the conversation, I encourage you to move to recording a lecture and posting that one afterwards.
That's also helpful too in terms of to use in a face-to-face setting that you might not be able to come in for that day. Students then can still see that full lecture even if something is going on for you that you're unable to be there.
I just saw a question from a comment from Susan. That's a good point. That's why we removed from the HyFlex that freedom to the students. And you have to make it clear that when they're scheduled to come to class, they have to come to class, even if the recorded lecture is going to be available for others. You still have the need, and it's a requirement to attend class. And that's why I have never been a big fan of the HyFlex, because you're completely right. If I see that everything is going to be available later, why bother, especially if it's 8 in the morning, or too late. So you as a faculty member should, and you have to tell them, those of you who are scheduled to be in class, attendance is going to be a major requirement.
My only concern there is that we don't want students coming who are sick just to get the grade. That's my only fear moving forward.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Absolutely. If they tell you they're sick, you know, and I think this is because COVID-19 and this situation is fairly new. Because in other instances, you as a faculty member, you decide when an excuse is valid. But I think nowadays with this new situation, more flexibility needs to be given. And
I'll add to what Miko has said too. I want my students to want to come to class even if they've seen the lecture. I want my students to want to come to class because they enjoy learning with one another. And one of the ways that I think I can reward that is to have an activity in the class that students can complete as a grade for coming to class that day. And I think in fairness for what may happen with COVID-19, I can make an alternate assignment that's not really that much work for me, but can give a student who might be sick the knowledge that they can stay home that day and do that assignment and still get credit for it.
Other questions? And feel free to use your mic as well if you prefer to ask us directly instead of typing.
I appreciate Martin's point here that synchronous activities online can work better when students are on or near campus. In the spring, the synchronous activities were poorly attended, but the students were, of course, scattered. I think that's a key point to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. And you don't have to decide, and that's why we promote the idea of backward design in all the sessions, because you really don't have to design up front, decide before looking at the content. If I were you, I would look first at all the content in your class carefully. And based on that, you can decide, well, this one can be synchronous, this is how it will work. This can be asynchronous, this is how it will work. And then you can decide with your chair what's the best approach. If you force it to make a decision now without taking into account the actual content, that's when you can have some challenges. So always start with the end goal, with the content, and then at the end that will inform the best delivery. And I understand that that's a whole different conversation because your chair will help you decide on that. But I encourage you to come prepared to that meeting, to that conversation with them, looking at the content and which areas are better for synchronous or asynchronous or blended to justify your choices in case you need to.
Hey guys, this is Beverly. I thought it would be easier just to ask this question rather than type it in the chat, but so I'm kind of thinking of, you know,
all right, Kibu. Bye, love. Bye.
the various types of delivery, right? Like if, for those of us that are on the meeting, if, you know, I was doing something, Martin's doing something else, Susan's doing something else, Maria's doing something else, that it's going to be really confusing for the students, you know, who's doing what? How do I keep up with how this class is different from this class? So, I mean, I do think that's a challenge, but my real question is, do you guys know of any good resources to kind of help educate the students about all of these different formats? Because, you know, since March, most of the resources, including webinars and trainings that I've seen, have been targeted towards faculty. But I absolutely think that, you know, the students have got to have something to help them with this process as well. So I guess my question is really about students and resources, if you guys know of any good solutions, options.
I think that's an excellent point. We have a Canvas course for students, but that course does not include this latest development about the type of courses because it's brand new. So to your point, I think it will be a great idea to include in there that once that's updated, we can share the link with you and you encourage all of your students to pay attention, especially to that portion of that course. in which they can see the types of courses, some examples, and maybe some strategies about how to be successful with that.
I want to add to what Miko said. I would like to encourage everyone to create their course and to make it public as early as possible to their students in Canvas so that students are able to figure out what their semester might look like. I hear from my student workers at the Teaching and Learning Center that some of their faculty don't use Canvas. And so I think that also provokes some confusion. And in a semester where students may get sick and we may get sick, having that Canvas site fully operational as early as possible, I think can help all of us work through things. I'll say too, as a resource, if you have questions about communicating to students or helping students sort of work through any confusion, in addition to the Canvas resource that Miko described, please reach out to the TLC and our student consultants can give you a sense or help you work through those questions. And if you're in the same program, for example, it might be that some of those suggestions could be implemented beyond your class, beyond your course, and then influence how students in a program are working through any confusion that might be resulting. So again, our students have great ideas and experiences. They'd be happy to help.
Yeah,
To
thanks.
Scott's point, sorry, go ahead.
I think, I hear students refer to online instruction or an online course all the time as, oh yeah, this is where we'll be teaching ourselves. And that's kind of their interpretation. And one thing I've done with my classes that are online is I kind of do a little video for navigating, where are things housed if you need to know what to do or you need to know, this or that. I try to give them a little video tutorial of my particular Canvas section so that they do kind of know what my particulars are. And it helps somewhat.
I want to emphasize the power of your making that recording. The more that your students hear and see you, the more they see that they're with you in this part of the course and it's not them teaching themselves on their own. I think you're building social presence in your classroom. I think that's key.
I agree. And back to the point about the confusion, I agree that that's true. One decision that we made that really was helpful and we want to continue doing it is to stick to those technologies that are supported by the university. If all the students who are doing something synchronous or online use just WebEx or just everything on Canvas, if there's that consistency in the tools, that also helps the students.
So maybe one more question regarding WebEx Teams. It's not something I'm very familiar with, and I know that that's, I guess, really an IT function. But is there a possibility that we could do some type of training with WebEx Teams? Because I mean, I myself kind of need to feel comfortable with it before I try to incorporate it into my class. But at this point, I'm not sure I would feel comfortable with it, if that makes sense.
I'll be happy to ask DoIT to offer this training. I know they have a WebEx meetings training tomorrow. I believe it's at 2 o'clock. Advanced scheduling features in WebEx. So I could also ask them about WebEx Teams. I replied on the chat that I want to try it for my class because I liked how it's working for the faculty discussions right now. And I think it could work really well in a classroom setting too. And to go back to Miko's point about sort of using the technologies we have, WebEx Teams sort of keep things within what students are familiar with. So I'm going to try it out, I think, and see how it works. So if you try it out, let me know. If I try it out, I'll let you know how it works.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I just need to learn more myself.
We can learn this. I'll talk to DoIT.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Any other questions? Well, you have our contact information. And again, this is an overview. The possibilities are endless. There are so many choices, so many things that you can do. And if you have questions about how to go for each modality, we're happy to work with you. We will work with you. We have a variety of training that covers these topics, but if there's need for more, just let us know. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Hicks. Anything that you want to add before we wrap it up?
Sure. I just want to say thank you to all who've joined us today. And please know that we're still ready to help you. As Miko said, we have lots of resources posted to Online Learning's page. And please do like and follow us on social media, both Online Learning and the TLC, where we can have some real-time conversations and share ideas and work out any problems we might be having. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.